"Step away from that car," Adrian Vale warned as steam hissed across the garage floor. Mason Reed had just pulled 9-year-old Lucy clear when his steel toolbox tipped and an oil-stained blueprint slid beneath her shoes. Lucy touched the 3 broken ring symbol, then pointed toward her mother. "Mom keeps that design in her safe." Claire Hartfrosch. Adrian raised his phone, photographed the page, and said smoothly, "She's confused. Put it away." Mason looked at the trembling pressure line. The paper isn't what nearly hurt her. 3 hours earlier, Bell Street Garage had smelled of hot rubber, motor oil, and coffee that had been sitting too long beneath fluorescent lights. A white banner stretched above the service bays. "Hartwell Cares. Safety for every family." Volunteers moved between donated vehicles while a local radio played softly beneath the clatter of sockets and air tools. Mason worked at the far lift in a faded navy shirt, his sleeves rolled above scarred wrists, a wedding ring hanging from a thin chain beneath his collar. His 10-year-old son, Noah, sat near the parts counter assembling a tiny engine from discarded bolts and washers. The free repair day meant Mason would earn nothing, but Hank Bell had told him several families could not afford another breakdown. That had been enough. Just before noon, a dark SUV rolled unevenly through the open bay door. The woman driving wore plain jeans and a gray coat, but her posture carried a quiet precision that did not belong to someone accustomed to being ignored. Lucy sat beside her, holding a small drawing notebook against her chest. She did not answer when Hank greeted them. She watched the ceiling lights instead, blinking each time the impact wrench snapped across the garage. Mason heard the SUV before it stopped. 3 dry knocks, a pause, then a faint metallic flutter beneath the ordinary idle. He wiped his hands and approached without looking at the expensive watch half hidden beneath Claire's sleeve. "How long has it been doing that?" "The dashboard says nothing is wrong," Claire replied. Mason crouched beside the front wheel. "That wasn't my question." Claire studied him, surprised but not offended. 2 weeks. It stalled once outside Lucy's school. Mason's eyes moved to the child. "With her inside?" Claire nodded. He motioned toward the waiting area. "Then nobody drives it until I know why." Adrian Vale appeared before Claire could respond, immaculate in a charcoal jacket with a Hartwell volunteer badge pinned to his lapel. His smile was warm enough for photographs and measured enough for lawyers. "Mrs. Hart, our diagnostic team can handle this. Mr. Reed is one of the local mechanics assisting us today." Mason heard the careful distance in the words. Local mechanic, assisting, never trusted. He said nothing. He opened the hood and listened. Lucy drifted closer, stopping several feet away. Mason noticed her shoulders tighten when the compressor kicked on, so he crossed the bay and shut it down. The sudden quiet made several volunteers look over. "Better?" he asked. Lucy gave one small nod. He placed a clean shop towel on a chair for her notebook, then returned to the engine. Adrian glanced at his watch. "We should run the standard scan and keep the line moving." Mason connected the reader. The screen glowed green. No critical fault. Yet the metal tray beside the fender trembled. A wrench tapped against its edge 3 times, stopped, then tapped once more. Mason's expression changed. Not fear. Recognition. He reached for the isolation switch just as Lucy leaned toward the open bay, curious about the sound. The pressure line snapped sideways. Mason caught her by the shoulder and pulled her back as vapor sliced through the space where her face had been. His toolbox struck the floor. The blueprint slipped free. And while every adult stared at the steam, Lucy stared at the symbol. Adrian denied recognizing it, but Mason saw his thumb move across his phone screen. A photograph of the exact R17 corner appeared for half a second, and beneath it, 2 blue check marks confirmed that someone had already received it. The 2 blue check marks vanished when Adrian turned his phone face down, but Mason had already seen them. Steam thinned beneath the fluorescent lights, leaving beads of moisture on the concrete and a sharp metallic smell in the air. Lucy stood close to Claire, one hand gripping the sleeve of her gray coat, while Mason folded the oil-stained R17 blueprint along its old creases and placed it back inside his steel toolbox. "Is she hurt?" Claire asked. No, are you sure? Mason crouched several feet from Lucy so he would not crowd her. Did the steam touch your skin? Lucy shook her head. Only then did he stand. Adrian stepped between Mason and the open hood with the calm efficiency of someone restoring order after an embarrassing interruption. Everyone, please give us some room. There is no continuing danger. His voice carried across Bell Street Garage without becoming loud. Volunteers stopped whispering. A Hartwell technician pulled the portable scanner closer, and the green words "No critical fault" still glowed on its screen as if the machine had not nearly missed something important. The pressure fitting moved, Mason said. Because the line was disturbed, Adrian replied. It moved before I touched it. That is your interpretation. The garage settled into an uneasy quiet. Sunlight cut through the raised bay door, catching dust above the polished Hartwell display tables and the darker grease stains near Mason's boots. On the metal tray beside the SUV, the same wrench trembled once against the rim, producing a small, bright click that no one acknowledged. Adrian turned toward the gathering volunteers with a sympathetic smile. Mr. Reed is an experienced local mechanic. We appreciate the work he gives this community. But advanced pressure management systems require certified analysis, and speculation can create unnecessary fear. The words sounded respectful. That was what made them sting. Mason heard someone near the coffee table whisper, "He probably loosened it." Another voice answered, "Maybe he wants the company to pay him." A young volunteer lifted a phone and aimed it toward Mason's faded navy shirt, his worn boots, and the toolbox at his feet. No one filmed Adrian's phone lying face down on the display table. Mara Keene arrived from the front office carrying a leather folder and a tablet. Her dark suit was untouched by the oil and heat of the service bays. She looked first at Adrian, then at the scanner, and only afterward at Mason. "Mr. Reed, I'm Hartwell's general counsel. I need to document what happened." "Document the line failure," Mason said. "We will document all relevant conduct." She opened the folder. "Do you hold an active mechanical engineering license?" "No." "A patent associated with this valve system?" "Not anymore." "Were you ever employed by Hartwell Mobility?" Mason's jaw tightened once. "No." Mara's pen paused above the form. "Then on what authority did you disable a company-certified vehicle?" Claire looked from the disabled SUV to Lucy, then back to Mason. She did not defend him. She had watched him protect her daughter, but kindness did not prove ownership, and calm did not make every claim true. Still, something in the question seemed to trouble her. The vehicle had almost hurt Lucy, yet the first official concern was who had permission to stop it. "He prevented the line from cycling again," Claire said carefully. "That does not establish that his diagnosis is correct," Adrian replied. "It establishes that he acted outside procedure." Mason reached through the open driver's door, removed the key, and tied a red shop tag through the ring. "Do not start." He handed it to Hank Bell rather than keeping it himself. "No one turns that engine over until the pressure circuit is checked mechanically." Hank accepted the key, but his rough fingers hesitated around it. Beyond him, the white Hartwell Cares banner shifted in the warm draft from the door. Adrian lowered his voice. "Hank, the sponsorship agreement requires certified personnel to approve safety holds. We cannot fund a community program where volunteers override protocol." The words landed harder than a threat because they were delivered like a reminder. Hank glanced toward the aging lifts, the patched roof, and the row of families still waiting for free repairs. Losing Hartwell's support would not punish Mason alone. Could close the garage before winter. Mara placed the tablet on the workbench and turned it toward Mason. A form filled the screen beneath the Hartwell logo. Acknowledgement of unauthorized mechanical intervention. "Sign here," she said. "It does not assign liability. It simply confirms that you acted without corporate authorization." Mason read every line. The fluorescent light reflected across the glass, cutting through words like disruption, interference, and unverified claim. Nowhere did the form mention the burst of steam, Lucy's position, or the scanner's failure to detect the pressure spike. "Add what happened to the line," Mason said. "This is not an incident report." Then I won't sign it. Adrian sighed gently, almost regretfully. Mr. Reed, pride will not protect this garage. Mason looked toward Noah at the parts counter. His son had stopped building the little engine and was watching him with both hands wrapped around a brass washer. Mason could have shouted. He could have opened the toolbox and demanded that everyone examine R-17. Instead, he walked to Lucy's chair, moved her drawing notebook farther from a wet streak on the floor, and placed a clean towel beneath it. Pride isn't why I stopped the car, he said. A child was standing beside it. Claire's eyes followed his hands. He had been denied the right to explain, blamed before an inspection, and warned that his decision could cost another man his livelihood. Yet the only thing he had moved carefully was her daughter's notebook. Mara closed the folder without obtaining his signature. Adrian asked the Hartwell technician to reconnect the scanner, but Mason stepped in front of the driver's door without touching anyone. Not with her here. The system says the vehicle is safe. The system also said that 10 seconds ago. For the first time, Adrian's smile thinned. He looked toward the closed toolbox and said, "A stained sketch marked in the lower right corner does not outweigh certified data." Claire's head turned slowly. Mason had folded the page before Adrian crossed the bay, and the oil-darkened lower right corner had never faced him. Yet somehow, Adrian knew exactly where the marking was. Claire kept her eyes on Adrian. "How did you know where the marking was?" The question was quiet, but it changed the air around the workbench. Adrian did not look at the toolbox. He adjusted the cuff beneath his charcoal jacket and gave her the patient expression of a man explaining something ordinary. "I saw the page when it fell. We all did. The lower right corner was against the floor," Mason said. "Not for long. Long enough to photograph?" Mara's gaze moved toward Adrian's phone, still face down beside the scanner. The fluorescent lights hummed above them. Somewhere near the rear bay, an old wall clock clicked past 12:30, and the smell of scorched coolant lingered beneath the sweeter scent of coffee. Adrian lifted the phone and slipped it into his pocket. "We are losing perspective. A child was frightened, a fitting failed, and Mr. Reed has decided an old sketch is more trustworthy than a modern diagnostic system. Let us not turn confusion into accusation." Lucy's fingers tightened around Claire's sleeve. Mason noticed and stepped away from the workbench first, not because Adrian had won the moment, but because the child was watching every adult face harden around her. He lowered his voice. "She doesn't need to hear this." Adrian offered a thin smile. "Sensitivity is admirable, Mr. Reed. It is not engineering." Mason said nothing. He returned to the SUV and slid a drain pan beneath the damaged line. Behind him, Hank Bell cleared his throat. "Mason, can I talk to you?" They moved 2 bays down, where the noise of a box fan softened their voices. Hank held a yellow work order in one hand. Grease had darkened the cracks across his knuckles, and his eyes kept drifting toward the Hartwell banner. "That transmission job is waiting," he said. "The Delaney truck. Cash job." Mason looked at the clock. "I know. You miss it, he goes somewhere else." "I know." Hank's jaw worked before the words came. "And I know what your electric notice says." Mason looked through the office window at Noah. His son had returned to the little engine, but slowly now, fitting the same brass washer onto the same bolt and taking it off again. The red final notice envelope was folded inside Mason's lunch bag beneath the counter. 48 hours before the power company added another fee. Maybe less before the refrigerator in their rental stopped humming and Noah pretended not to care. "How long do I have?" Mason asked. 20 minutes, maybe." A metallic tick came from Claire's SUV. One soft tap, then another. Mason looked back toward it. "The pressure line is still holding heat." Hank lowered his voice. "Hartwell has technicians here. They trust the screen. And you trust the sound. I trust that her daughter rides in that seat." Hank stared at the yellow work order, then offered it to him. Mason did not take it. Instead, he pulled out his old flip phone, found the customer's number, and called. The conversation lasted less than a minute. "Mr. Delaney, this is Mason Reed. I'm not going to make your appointment." A pause. "No, sir. The garage didn't forget. I made the call. Another pause, sharper this time. Mason closed his eyes briefly. I understand. You have every right to take it somewhere else. When he ended the call, the yellow work order seemed heavier in Hank's hand. There goes $300, Hank said. More if he doesn't come back. Then we earn him back later. You always think there's a later. Mason glanced toward Noah again. There has to be. He returned to the SUV and rolled beneath it on a low creeper. The concrete was cold through his work shirt. Rust dust flaked onto his cheek as he loosened the underbody shield, and a thin ribbon of old fluid ran toward the drain pan. Near the rear bracket, something white caught against the black frame. Mason pinched it between two fingers and pulled free a narrow service tag. Its edges curled from heat. HCFV 214 was printed across the top in faded blue ink. He wiped it once with the cleanest corner of his rag. Adrian saw the tag and moved closer. That can go with the discarded parts. It isn't a part. It is an internal service marker. For what? Routine fleet maintenance. Mason turned the tag over. No customer name. No dealership number. Only the same HC initials printed beneath a small barcode. This isn't a fleet vehicle, he said. Adrian's answer came too quickly. Hartwell donates service resources to many community programs. The codes overlap. He held out his hand. I'll dispose of it properly. Mason placed the tag on the magnetic tray instead. Hank keeps every service record until the customer leaves. Adrian's smile remained, but the hand he lowered closed more tightly than before. Claire watched from beside Lucy's chair. She had not missed the speed of his answer, or the way he wanted the tag before anyone had scanned it. Mason did not look at her for confirmation. He went back beneath the SUV. 10 minutes later, the air compressor kicked on behind Lucy with a violent metallic bark. She flinched so hard that her drawing notebook slipped from her lap. Mason rolled out, crossed the bay, and shut the compressor down at the wall. We need that for the tire station, one volunteer complained. Use the rear unit. That's an extra walk. Mason picked up Lucy's notebook, saw the damp streaks spreading across the folding chair, and placed a clean shop towel beneath it. Then take the walk. Adrian gave a small breath of amusement. You are rearranging an entire event for one nervous child. Mason checked that Lucy had room between her chair and the wall. It's easier than asking her to stop being nervous. Noah had been watching from the parts counter. He opened Mason's paper lunch bag, looked inside, then walked over holding 2 crumpled dollar bills and 4 quarters. Dad, can I get cocoa? He asked. Mason looked at the money. It was everything left after gas. 1 cup. Noah glanced at Lucy. 2. We can split mine if it's not enough. Mason's face softened. He added the coins from his own pocket and sent Noah to the vending alcove with Hank. A few minutes later, Noah returned carrying 2 small paper cups, careful not to spill. He handed the fuller one to Lucy without being told. Mason drank water from the utility sink and pretended not to notice his son dividing the weaker cup into 2 lids so they could share. Claire saw all of it. She opened her purse, removed a cream-colored business card, and placed it beside Mason's tools. At least let me pay for the time you're losing. Mason wiped his hands before touching the card, but he did not turn it over. I'm fixing the car because your daughter is riding in it. You don't know what my time is worth, Claire said. Tonight, it's worth getting her home safely. He slid the card back toward her, without reading the name embossed on the other side. Adrian shook his head as though generosity were another form of poor judgment. This is exactly how misunderstandings grow. A small favor becomes a personal claim. Mason looked at the curled service tag on the tray, then at the oil-stained R17 inside his open toolbox. A favor doesn't change what a machine is doing. Lucy had opened her notebook again. While the adult spoke, she drew silently with a red crayon Noah had found beneath the counter. 3 broken arcs, a line slanting through the center, and beneath it, in a child's careful block letters, the same code printed on the tag Mason had just pulled from the SUV. HFE 214. Claire's breath caught. Lucy had never seen the underside of the vehicle, and Mason had never read the code aloud. Claire's breath caught when she saw the code beneath Lucy's red drawing, but she did not turn toward Mason. She lowered herself beside her daughter, careful to keep her voice steady. "Lucy, where did you see those letters?" Lucy's eyes moved toward Adrian, then down to the notebook. "I don't know. Did Mr. Reed tell you?" "No, did Noah?" Lucy shook her head. The garage seemed to tighten around the small circle of adults and children. The fluorescent lights hummed above the workbench, and a drop of coolant struck the metal drain pan beneath the SUV with a slow, hollow tick. Adrian stepped closer, keeping his hands open and his expression gentle. "Mrs. Hart, children absorb more than we realize. She may have seen the tag while Mr. Reed was handling it." "The tag was under the vehicle," Mason said. "She could have heard the code. I never read it aloud." "Then perhaps your son did." Noah looked up from his paper cup. "I didn't even know there was a tag." Adrian gave him a polite smile that somehow made the boy shrink back toward the parts counter. "Of course, no one is blaming you." Mason's eyes hardened slightly, but his voice stayed low. "Then don't question him like you are." He moved one step closer to Noah, not enough to challenge Adrian, only enough to put himself between the boy and the adults. Claire watched the gesture. Mason had lost a paying job, been asked to sign a statement against himself, and was now being treated as though his kindness were part of a plan. Yet his first instinct was still to protect a child from carrying an adult accusation. "Lucy," Claire said, "may I see your notebook?" Lucy held it tighter. Her thumb pressed into the worn cardboard cover, where a silver star sticker had peeled away at one corner. Claire did not reach for it. "You don't have to give it to me. You can show me." For several seconds, Lucy did nothing. The radio near the front office faded into static, then returned with the soft voice of a weather reporter. A breeze moved through the open bay and lifted the edge of the Hartwell banner above them. Finally, Lucy sat on the clean towel Mason had placed beneath her notebook and began turning pages. There were houses with square yellow windows, a dog with 6 legs, a row of red trees, and a careful drawing of a man wearing glasses beside a black rectangle that might have been a desk. She passed the newest page with HCFV 214 and kept going. Mason did not lean over her shoulder. He stayed where she could see him without feeling watched. "When did you draw the first symbol?" he asked. It was the only question he offered. Lucy stopped. Her finger rested on a page near the middle of the notebook. The date in the upper corner had been written in Claire's handwriting 8 months earlier, part of the routine she used so Lucy's therapist could track when certain images appeared. On the page were 3 broken arcs drawn in gray pencil. A red line crossed the center. Beside them stood a square with a round handle, and next to the square, a tall figure with glasses. Near the lower right corner were 3 short marks, the same 3 marks Mason had drawn beside the R17 revision number. Claire's hand rose to her mouth but did not touch it. "That's my office safe," she said. Adrian glanced at the page and recovered quickly. "Or any safe. Children draw boxes. They draw circles. Hartwell has used variations of ring imagery in technical materials for years." "Not this one," Mason said. He opened his steel toolbox slowly and removed R17 by its cleanest edge. He did not place it beside Lucy's notebook. Instead, he set it several feet away beneath the white inspection lamp, keeping the child's drawing separate from the evidence adults were arguing over. The oil-darkened lower right corner caught the light. 3 short marks sat beside the handwritten revision code. Mason looked at Lucy. "Don't look at that page." Adrian exhaled. "Mr. Reed, this is becoming suggestive." Mason turned for blank work order sheets face down on the bench. On the back of each, he drew a simple symbol. A closed circle, 3 separate curves, a gear shape, and the broken ring mark from R17. He folded the papers once so no one could see which was which, mixed them, then spread them apart. "Lucy," he said, "which one was in the safe?" Claire looked sharply at him. "She doesn't have to answer." "No," Mason said. "She doesn't." Lucy studied the 4 folded sheets. She touched the second one. Mason opened it. 3 broken arcs. He mixed them again. Lucy chose the same symbol a second time. Then she reached back to her own notebook and pointed at the red line across the center. That part was red, she said. Dad touched it. Claire's face changed, not belief, not yet, but pain recognizing its own handwriting. Your father, Lucy nodded. He said not to let anyone take it until we knew whose it was. Adrian's mouth tightened for less than a second. Daniel was reviewing dozens of legacy concepts before his death. Lucy may have overheard fragments of business discussions she could not understand. The mention of Daniel settled heavily between them. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Her husband had died 11 months earlier, and the safe in her office had remained locked through most of the months that followed. She remembered him standing beside it late one night, holding a sealed envelope and refusing to tell her why he seemed troubled. At the time, grief had already entered their home in doctor's appointments and carefully measured silences. She had believed the envelope could wait. Now her daughter's pencil marks suggested it had been waiting for them. Still, Claire looked at Mason with guarded eyes. Even if the page in my safe matches yours, that does not prove you created it. Mason nodded. It doesn't. The lack of argument unsettled her more than a demand would have. You could have obtained a copy. I could have. You could be using Lucy's memory to make your claim look stronger. That's why you shouldn't trust my claim. Adrian's expression brightened, as though Mason had finally admitted defeat. Mason placed both hands flat on the workbench. Trust what can be checked. The garage grew quiet again. Mara stepped closer to the notebook, but she did not touch it. She photographed the dated page beside a ruler, then recorded the time. The drawing predates today, she said. That only establishes prior exposure, which is all it needs to establish right now, Mason replied. She saw something before she met me. Claire straightened. The hesitation in her face hardened into a decision, though not yet a verdict. She removed her phone from her coat pocket and called her executive assistant. Seal my office safe. No one opens it. Restrict access to the legacy archive until Mara arrives. Adrian turned too quickly. There's nothing in that archive tied to Reed. The words came cleanly, professionally, almost automatically. But no one had said Mason's last name in connection with the archive. No one had claimed the archive contained his work. And as the soft buzz of the fluorescent lights filled the space after his sentence, Claire looked at Adrian as though she were seeing the first hairline crack in something she had trusted for years. Claire did not look away from Adrian. How did you know the archive had nothing tied to Reed? Adrian's expression remained composed, but the pause before his answer was just long enough to be heard. Because I oversee legacy development, he said. His name has never appeared in any Hartwell record I have reviewed. Mason folded R17 along its old creases and returned it to the steel toolbox. Then the test should be simple. Mara lowered her phone. What test? Mason looked toward the SUV, where a thin line of coolant still trembled in the drain pan beneath the engine. One that doesn't require anyone to believe me. Adrian gave a quiet, professional laugh. We are not turning a charity garage into a laboratory. It already became one when that line nearly hit a child. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Lucy sat beside Claire with her notebook closed against her chest, while Noah stood near the parts counter holding the little engine he had built from washers and discarded bolts. The fluorescent lights reflected in the damp concrete between them, and the air carried the bitter smell of overheated rubber. Claire looked at the Hartwell technician beside the diagnostic cart. Can the system be tested safely? The technician glanced at Adrian before answering. At idle, yes, if the pressure line is secured. Adrian stepped closer to Claire. There is no reason to indulge an unverified theory in front of volunteers. We can tow the vehicle to a certified facility and handle this privately. Claire's hand settled on Lucy's shoulder. Privately is how questions disappear. Adrian's smile tightened. Questions also become rumors. Mason rolled a mechanical pressure gauge from Hank's cabinet and placed it on the workbench. The glass face was scratched, but the needle rested cleanly at 0. He added a strip of heat-sensitive tape, a quarter from his pocket, and Hank's phone mounted on a small clamp. "No Hartwell equipment except the vehicle," Mason said. "No adjustments by me once it starts." Mara watched him arrange each item. "Who operates the engine?" "Someone who doesn't know what I expect." Hank called over a mechanic from a neighboring shop who had come to volunteer that morning. The man introduced himself as Carl Benton and wiped his hands on his jeans. He had never met Mason before that day and had no relationship with Hartwell. Adrian objected gently. "An independent mechanic is not the same as an independent engineer. He only has to turn a key," Mason replied. "The machine can do the rest." Carl secured the repaired line with a temporary mechanical brace under Mason's instructions, then stepped away while Mara photographed every connection. Mason placed the quarter flat on the valve cover. He pressed the temperature strip along the return line and attached the old gauge where the electronic sensor fed into the control module. The digital scanner remained connected on the opposite fender, its green screen still showing NO critical fault. Mason stepped back until both hands were visible. "Start it. Idle only." Carl turned the key. The engine caught with a low shudder. First, nothing happened. The quarter stood on its edge, trembling beneath the white inspection lamp. Someone near the bay door whispered that Mason had wasted everyone's time. Adrian crossed his arms. 5 seconds. 10. The digital display stayed green. At 14 seconds, the mechanical needle moved higher than the electronic reading beside it. At 18, the heat strip began changing from black to deep orange. Then the quarter jumped once, twice, 3 times. It settled for 2 seconds before spinning sharply across the valve cover. "Shut it down," Mason said. Adrian spoke at the same moment. "Let it complete the cycle." Mason moved faster. He reached past Carl and turned the key himself. The engine died at 22 seconds. In the sudden silence, the box fan near Hank's office became the loudest sound in the garage. A folding chair stopped scraping across the floor. The volunteers who had been whispering stood motionless around the lift. Adrian's tone remained even. "You interrupted the test before the system could stabilize." Mason removed the heat strip with a pair of pliers. The center had turned almost white. Another 10 seconds and the return seal could have failed. "That is speculation." Mason loosened the sensor housing and tipped it beneath the inspection lamp. A black mark no wider than a hair ran across the copper contact. He held it where everyone could see but did not pass it around like a trophy. "Heat scoring," Hank said. The Hartwell technician leaned closer. "The scanner should have flagged that." "It did," Mason said. "Just not where you could see it." He asked Mara to open the SUV's raw service history rather than the customer summary. She hesitated, then turned the tablet toward the technician. 6 entries appeared under a secondary code, each marked low priority and automatically closed after ignition reset. Mason pointed at the timestamps. Same interval. Same pressure rise. Adrian shook his head. "Minor transient codes are common in aging vehicles." Mason opened his notebook to R16. The page showed the same 3-beat oscillation beside a hand-drawn pressure curve. He turned one page to R17, where the red pencil line rerouted the return flow before the heat spike. He did not say he had designed it. He only placed the 2 pages beside the printed service log. The shapes matched closely enough that Mara's hand slowly came down on the leather folder she had been holding. Claire studied the pages, then the heat strip, then the green scanner that had insisted nothing was wrong. "Can the test be repeated?" she asked. "By anyone," Mason said. "With the same conditions." Adrian's voice sharpened by a fraction. "Repeated demonstrations prove vibration, not authorship. The R16 instability was already resolved years ago." The words hung in the air. Mason looked at him. Mara looked at him. Even the Hartwell technician turned from the scanner. No one had spoken the designation R16 aloud. Mason had opened the notebook only after the engine was shut down, and Adrian had been standing too far away to read the handwritten page number. Claire's face lost what remained of its uncertainty. Not because she suddenly believed every claim Mason had made, but because Adrian had just revealed knowledge he insisted he did not possess. She took out her phone and spoke with the quiet authority she had hidden all afternoon. "This is Claire Hart. Suspend tomorrow's launch review. Preserve the raw service logs for every vehicle running this firmware. No deletions, no updates, no remote resets." The Hartwell technician straightened. Hank's eyes widened. Adrian's polished expression finally slipped. "Claire, that is an executive action." She met his gaze. "I know." Lucy looked up at Mason, no longer shrinking from the adults around her. He gave her a small nod, then turned to the technician who had trusted the scanner. "This isn't your fault. You worked from the data they gave you." The man swallowed and looked at the green screen as though it had betrayed him. Claire asked Mara to pull the full fleet list. When the hidden service records began loading, the first page showed the same. Suppressed code on vehicle after vehicle, all linked to a category marked HCFV. The tag Mason had found beneath the SUV was not an isolated service marker. It was the first visible piece of a system. The first page showed 12 vehicles. The second showed 37. By the time Mara reached the bottom of the file, the count had climbed to 186, each marked with the same HCFV prefix Mason had found beneath Claire's SUV. The printer in Hank's office began feeding out service records, page after page sliding into the tray beneath the pale fluorescent light. Rural clinics, school meal programs, veterans centers, church transportation vans, vehicles donated beneath the Hartwell Cares banner, then quietly classified inside the company as a field validation fleet. "Validation for what?" Hank asked. No one answered at first. The garage had grown so still that the soft drag of paper against paper sounded like fabric tearing. Claire stood behind Mara, one hand resting on the back of Lucy's chair. She no longer looked like a stranded mother waiting for a repair. Her shoulders had straightened, her voice had changed, and every Hartwell employee in the room now watched her before they moved. "Open the program authorization," she said. Adrian stepped closer. "Claire, we should discuss this privately." "Open it." Mara entered a restricted command. The tablet requested executive verification. Claire pressed her thumb against the screen, then spoke a 6-digit code without hesitation. A Hartwell seal appeared, followed by her full name and title. Claire Hart, Chief Executive Officer. Hank's eyes widened. Noah looked from the screen to Mason, waiting for some sign that the revelation changed what had happened. Mason only glanced toward Lucy and made certain the cup near her notebook was not close enough to spill. He had repaired the vehicle before knowing who Claire was. Her title arrived too late to change the meaning of his choice. The authorization file opened. At the top, the program was described as post-donation durability monitoring. Farther down, in smaller text, the language changed. Field performance validation under variable stress conditions. Continuous data collection. Remote threshold adjustment permitted. Recipient notification was listed as not required because the vehicles had already passed standard certification. Mara read the line twice. These organizations were never told they were supplying test data. Adrian placed both hands lightly on the workbench. They were not test subjects. The vehicles were fully approved. The monitoring program simply helped us improve long-term reliability. Mason lifted one of the printed logs. The same secondary code appeared 6 times on a school meal van in Kansas, 9 times on a clinic shuttle in West Virginia, 4 times on a veterans center vehicle outside Tulsa. Each warning had been automatically reduced to low priority. Each report closed after the ignition reset. Improvement usually starts by letting someone know there's a problem, Mason said. There was no verified safety problem, Adrian replied. Until today, Claire said. Adrian's eyes shifted toward the open bay door, where 2 local reporters remained beyond the service line. His hand moved to his phone, then stopped when he noticed Mara watching. "We should secure the building," he said. "Speculation around a charitable program could do lasting damage." "To the program?" Mason asked. "To the people who depend on it. They already depend on those vehicles." Mason laid the Kansas service log beside the heat-scorched strip from Claire's SUV. "That's why they should know." Adrian's voice cooled. And you believe alarming a school district before we complete an internal review is responsible? Mason looked at the printed route description. The van carried food to children in 3 counties. He could have used the list to humiliate Adrian in front of the cameras. He could have held R-17 above his head and demanded that everyone finally admit who had been right. Instead, he reached for a legal pad and wrote 3 headings: child transport, medical transport, elder services. We start with the vehicles where a stall would leave someone in danger, he said. Then the rest. Claire studied him. You are not asking me to establish authorship first. A name on a blueprint won't keep a van from stopping on a mountain road. You understand that this may be the first evidence anyone has taken seriously about what was done to you. Mason's pencil paused. For a moment, the muscles in his hand tightened around it. Noah saw the movement. So did Claire. I understand, Mason said. But those people didn't erase my name. The words settled quietly, carrying more weight than anger could have. Claire turned to Mara. Notify outside safety council. Preserve every raw service log. Freeze all remote firmware changes. Adrian stepped between them and the tablet. Not enough to appear threatening, only enough to become an obstacle. A freeze across the fleet could trigger contractual defaults, insurance review, and mandatory disclosure. You may be putting the company at risk based on one garage test. Then give me a better explanation for the same suppressed code across 186 vehicles. The threshold settings were approved. By whom? Adrian's jaw tightened. Engineering leadership. Name them. He looked down at the papers, and a bead of perspiration appeared near his temple despite the cooling air in the garage. The approvals evolved over time. That isn't a name. Adrian removed a handkerchief and wiped his glasses. Daniel reviewed the original program. Claire went still. Lucy's pencil stopped moving across the notebook. My husband was in hospice when these thresholds were changed, Claire said. Daniel supported field monitoring before his condition worsened. He also left me a sealed instruction concerning legacy engineering records. Adrian's hand lowered. The pause was brief, but it was the first time fear crossed his face without permission. Claire took Lucy's hand. We're going to my office. Adrian immediately shook his head. The archive should remain untouched until legal establishes a chain of custody. Mara closed the tablet. I am legal. Corporate legal, Adrian corrected. And at the moment, emotionally involved parties are making decisions around an unverified claimant. Mason heard the phrase and looked toward Claire. It was the same method Adrian had used on him. Make the person asking questions appear unstable, personal, unqualified. Claire heard it too. Her face did not harden. It became calm. Seal the archive, she told Mara. Bring an independent witness. Adrian comes with us. The Hartwell headquarters stood 20 minutes away, a glass and steel building whose polished lobby reflected every person twice. Mason arrived in Hank's truck with his steel toolbox between his boots. He had considered leaving it at the garage, but R-17 had spent too many years being treated like something that should remain hidden. Noah stayed with Hank, while Lucy remained beside Claire, her notebook held against her coat. Upstairs, Claire's office smelled faintly of cedar and closed rooms. The city glowed through tall windows as afternoon light turned gray. A framed photograph of Daniel Hart stood beside the desk, thinner than Mason expected, wearing glasses like the figure in Lucy's old drawing. Claire crossed to a wall panel and entered 2 codes. The safe opened with a deep mechanical click. Inside sat a sealed brown envelope, a compact digital recorder, and a clean blueprint rolled inside a protective sleeve. Claire carried the items to the conference table. No one spoke as she unrolled the page.
R-17.
The same valve map, the same red correction, the same 3 broken ring symbol. Unlike Mason's copy, it bore no oil stains, only a Hartwell intake stamp and a blank contributor field. Adrian looked at the window instead of the blueprint. Claire opened the envelope. Her husband's handwriting crossed the front. Verify original contributor before launch. Inside was a note naming only a mechanic called Reed and a shipping reference number. Mara recorded each item before Claire touched the digital recorder. When she pressed play, static filled the room, followed by Daniel's weakened voice. The valve correction did not come from our internal team. Adrian says the source cannot be verified. I found correspondence referring to a mechanic named Reed. Do not authorize final attribution until we know who sent the original work. A cough interrupted the recording. Then Daniel added, more softly, someone deserves to be thanked before this company deserves to profit. The file ended. The room remained motionless. Evening light reflected Claire's face in the glass, placing her grief beside the woman she had become since Daniel's death. Adrian spoke first. Daniel was heavily medicated. His concerns were preliminary. Mason did not look at him. He looked at the shipping number written in the note. Without a word, he opened the lower compartment of his toolbox and removed a faded postal receipt, folded around an old Bell Street printing invoice. The tracking number matched every digit. The receipt proved Adrian had received a package from Mason days before Hartwell registered the first R-16 prototype, but it still could not prove what had been inside. Mara photographed the numbers and then checked the internal archive. A metadata record showed the original contributor field had once contained the name Mason Reed. Seconds later, the entry had been overwritten by an administrator account shared among senior engineering staff. Adrian exhaled slowly, almost with relief. A shared account proves nothing. Claire stared at the screen.
No.
Not yet. Mason closed his toolbox. Then don't accuse anyone yet. Adrian turned toward him, surprised. Mason's voice stayed even. Preserve the evidence. Check the dates. Find who changed it. If you rush this because you're angry, he'll call it a mistake. If you build it correctly, he won't have anywhere to hide. Claire looked from the clean blueprint to Mason's oil-stained copy, then to the list of 186 vehicles still operating across the country. The truth was no longer small enough for an office, a private settlement, or a quiet correction inside a database. Before the sun went down, Claire ordered the records, the test engine, the original blueprints, and every surviving camera file taken back to Bell Street Garage, because what had begun beneath a charity banner would now have to be answered in the same place, before witnesses who could not be edited out. By 7 the next morning, Bell Street Garage no longer looked like a place where men shouted over impact wrenches and drank coffee from chipped mugs. The center bay had been cleared. Yellow safety tape marked a wide perimeter around the test. Engine and 2 independent engineers checked every seal beneath the cold white glare of portable work lights. A representative from Hartwell's insurer stood beside Mara Keene near the parts counter. 3 local reporters waited behind a painted line on the concrete. Their cameras pointed toward the same workbench where Mason Reed had been told his word carried less weight than a diagnostic screen. Above them, the Hartwell Cares banner still hung from the rafters. No one had taken it down. Claire wanted the words visible. Mason arrived through the side door wearing the same faded navy work shirt, freshly washed but permanently darkened at the cuffs. His steel toolbox pulled against one shoulder. He had slept less than 2 hours. Noah walked beside him carrying the small engine made from washers and discarded bolts, then stopped when he saw the cameras. "Do I have to talk?" he asked. "No," Mason said. "You stay where Hank can see you. Are you going to be okay?" Mason rested a hand briefly on the boy's shoulder. "I'm going to tell the truth carefully." That answer seemed to satisfy Noah more than a promise that everything would be fine. Hank led him to the glass-walled office above the service floor, where Lucy already sat beside Claire's assistant with her drawing notebook in her lap. The children would watch from behind reinforced glass, away from the engine and the questions adults had created. Claire stood near the center lift in a dark blue coat, not behind a podium and not beside Adrian. She had the authority to end the meeting before it began, but she did not use it. She had ordered the records preserved, the equipment sealed, and the witnesses brought together. Now she intended to see what each person would say when silence was no longer available as protection. Adrian entered last. His charcoal suit was immaculate. He greeted the insurer by name, thanked the engineers for their neutrality, and shook Hank's hand as though they were preparing for a ribbon cutting. When he saw Mason, His expression softened with practiced concern. "Mr. Reed," he said, "I hope we can resolve this without doing more damage than necessary." Mason placed his toolbox on the workbench. "That depends on what you think the damage is." Mara called the room to order. There would be no interruptions during evidence review. The reporters could record but not ask questions until the technical demonstration ended. Every item would be photographed, logged, and handled by an independent witness. The first object placed beneath the inspection light was Mason's oil-stained R17. The paper looked almost fragile against the polished steel table. Its folds had whitened with age. The lower right corner held the handwritten revision code, the 3 broken ring symbol, and the red correction line that Lucy had recognized. Claire then placed the clean R17 from her safe several feet away, still inside its protective sleeve. She did not set them side by side yet. That comparison would come only after the chain of custody was established. Adrian addressed the room before Mara could proceed. 2 similar documents do not establish authorship. Hartwell circulated preliminary designs among contractors, consultants, suppliers, and service partners. Mr. Reed may have received a working copy through any number of informal channels. It was a reasonable explanation. One of the reporters lowered her camera to write it down. The insurer's representative nodded slightly. Even Hank looked toward Mason with worry. Adrian continued in the same measured tone. The contributor field in the archive was accessed through a shared administrative account. That is poor record-keeping, perhaps, but not theft. And a postal receipt proves only that a package was mailed. It does not prove what was inside. For several seconds, it felt as though the case had grown smaller again. An old mechanic's memory against a corporation's incomplete files. Mason did not rush to fill the silence. He opened his toolbox and removed the faded postal receipt, the Bell Street printing invoice, and the bound notebook containing R01 through R16. He placed them in chronological order rather than holding them up for the cameras. "The receipt has a weight," he said. Mara checked it. 2 pounds, 11 ounces. Mason pointed to the printing invoice. 17 large format pages, heavy stock, paid in cash at 6:42 p.m. on the same date. "That still does not identify the contents," Adrian said. "No," Mason agreed. "It identifies the size of the question." The answer did not defeat Adrian's explanation, but it stopped the room from accepting it too quickly. Mara entered the invoice number into Bell Street's archived accounting system. A scanned work note appeared. Customer provided hand-drawn valve maps. Red line revision included. Hank stared at the screen. "My wife wrote that," he said. "She handled the books back then." Adrian's jaw moved once. "A garage note is not an engineering record." "It isn't supposed to be," Mason replied. "It's a garage note. That's why no one thought to erase it." The first fracture moved through the room without sound. Claire looked toward the office glass. Lucy had risen from her chair. She did not wave or speak. She simply held her notebook against the window, open to the page she had drawn 8 months earlier, the safe, the broken ring symbol, and the red line. Claire lifted one hand to let her know she had seen it. Then she turned back to Adrian. "You offered a private settlement last night," she said. "Would you like to repeat the terms in front of the record?" Adrian's expression did not change. "I offered to protect the company, this garage, and Mr. Reed's family from years of expensive litigation." He faced Mason with what looked almost like compassion. "The agreement would pay enough to clear Bell Street's debt and provide for your son. No admission from either side. No public accusation that could collapse under legal scrutiny." Hank's breath caught. Mason knew exactly what the offer meant. The leaking roof would be repaired. The electric notice in his lunch bag would become meaningless. Noah could stop pretending that cold rooms were an adventure. Adrian had chosen the right pressure point because men like him understood that poverty did not merely empty a wallet. It narrowed every moral decision until survival looked like surrender. "You can save your son from a hard life," Adrian said. Mason looked up at the office. Noah stood behind the glass, both hands resting on the little engine he had built from scraps. "Not by teaching him the truth has a price." Mason answered. No one applauded. The sentence was too quiet for that. It simply removed the offer from the room. Mara moved to the next item, security footage from the garage. The original camera above the center bay had captured the moment R-17 fell, but Adrian's body blocked much of the view. He pointed this out immediately. The video cannot show what was on the page. It cannot establish that I recognized anything. For a moment, the explanation held. The footage showed steam, Mason pulling Lucy clear, the blueprint sliding across the floor, and Adrian raising his phone. But the crucial corner was hidden behind his shoulder. One reporter whispered that the image was inconclusive. Adrian's posture loosened for the first time that morning. Then Mason asked a single question. Can you play the reflection? Mara looked at him. What reflection? Mason pointed toward the chrome cabinet beside the SUV. Its curved surface had mirrored the opposite side of the bay. The image was distorted but visible. Mara enlarged the frame. In the reflection, Adrian's phone screen faced the cabinet for less than a second. The camera caught the photograph he had taken. Not the whole blueprint, not the engine diagram, but the exact lower right corner containing R-17 and the broken ring mark. The timestamp appeared at the bottom. 47 seconds later, his message had ordered the legacy archive locked. Adrian's hand moved toward his tie, then stopped. That was a standard preservation step. Before a dispute existed? Claire asked. Before you had heard my full claim? Mason added. Adrian turned toward Mara. This is becoming theater. If there is additional evidence, present it through proper legal review. That is what we are doing, Mara said. Her laptop chimed. The outside forensic team had finished restoring the unsynchronized backup mailbox discovered the night before. A new folder appeared on the projection screen, dated 11 years earlier. Its contents included one deleted message from Adrian, an attachment tied to Mason's shipping number, and a subject line that made Claire slowly place both hands on the workbench. Mara moved the cursor over the unopened file. Around the garage, every conversation stopped. The final email had not yet been opened, but Adrian was already staring at it like a man who recognized the room in which the truth had been waiting. Mara clicked the unopened email. The projection screen brightened, and Adrian Vale's words appeared across the white garage wall. Remove external contributor field. Use current valve map to meet launch date. Beneath the message sat an attachment number matching every digit on Mason Reed's faded postal receipt. No one spoke. The projector fan whispered above the test engine, and somewhere behind the glass office, Noah's small metal model slipped against the windowsill with a soft click. Mara enlarged the file header. Sent from Adrian Vale's account 11 years ago, she said. Recovered from the unsynchronized backup mailbox. The attachment was received through the same shipping reference recorded on Mr. Reed's receipt. Adrian stared at the screen without blinking. His fingers tightened around the edge of the workbench. An email requesting removal of an external field does not prove theft. Contributor fields were routinely cleaned before final release. Claire's voice remained controlled. Why was Mason's name in the field? We don't know that it was. Mara opened the preserved metadata beside the email. The original record filled the screen. External contributor, Mason Reed. A second entry showed the field being overwritten 17 minutes after Adrian's message. The administrator credentials were shared, but the access terminal number matched the workstation assigned to his office. Adrian wet his lips. Those terminals were used by assistants. Your badge opened that office at 9:14 p.m., Mara said. The overwrite occurred at 9:19. The insurer's representative stopped writing. One of the reporters slowly lowered her camera, then raised it again with both hands. Adrian looked toward Claire as though the years between them might still offer protection. I was under pressure to meet a launch schedule. Preliminary attribution was unresolved. That does not mean his design was production ready. Mason had not moved from the workbench. The oil-stained R-17 lay beneath the inspection lamp, its red pencil correction crossing the valve map like a healed scar. Then test it, he said. The two independent engineers stepped toward the sealed engine. Every bolt had been marked. Every sensor had been photographed. The R-16 configuration was loaded first, using the same valve map Adrian had ordered retained for the launch. Mason remained behind the safety line with both hands visible. He did not touch the engine. He placed a quarter on the valve cover, then stepped away. "Start," Mara said. The engine turned over. The quarter trembled beneath the portable lights. The digital system remained green. At 12 seconds, the mechanical pressure needle began to climb beyond the software reading. At 18, the heat strip darkened. Then the quarter jumped once, twice, 3 times. It paused, spun sharply, and slid across the metal. "Shut it down," Mason said. One of the independent engineers killed the ignition at 22 seconds. The engine stopped with a hard internal knock. Hot metal ticked as it cooled. The lead engineer examined the readings, then faced the witnesses. The electronic threshold failed to identify a pressure oscillation that the mechanical gauge recorded clearly. Continued operation could damage the return seal and cause a stall. Adrian's voice came from somewhere behind him. "A laboratory demonstration cannot reproduce every road condition." "This is not a laboratory," Mason said. "It's the same failure that happened in that vehicle." Claire looked toward the printed list of 186 HCFV vehicles arranged along the wall. A school meal van, a rural clinic shuttle, a veterans center transport. Names of organizations that had accepted Hartwell's generosity without being told they were part of field validation. "Load R-17, she ordered. The engineers replaced only the valve routing configuration shown by Mason's red correction. No other component changed. The quarter returned to the same spot. The engine started again. 10 seconds passed. 20. 30. The mechanical needle remained inside the safe range. The heat strip held its color. The quarter stood on its edge. Without moving, the lead engineer repeated the test. Then another engineer repeated it with different monitoring equipment. The result did not change. "The corrected routing eliminates the oscillation," the lead engineer said. "The modification is located exactly where Mr. Reed marked it on R-17. Adrian's hand slipped from the workbench. A silver pen fell from his fingers, struck the concrete, and rolled beneath the Hartwell Cares banner. He did not bend to retrieve it. "Technical accuracy does not establish exclusive authorship," he said, but the authority had left his voice. Mara placed Mason's bound development notebook beneath the document camera.
R01, R02.
Page after page of failed routes, pressure calculations, handwritten corrections, and dates preceding Hartwell's first prototype. She matched the ink dates to the printing invoice, then placed the clean R-17 from Claire's safe beside Mason's oil-stained copy. At last, the image promised from the moment Lucy first whispered in the garage stood in full view. 2 versions of the same design, the same 3 broken ring symbol, the same handwritten revision code, the same red correction. One protected in a corporate safe. One carried for years in a mechanic's steel toolbox. Claire looked up toward the office glass. Lucy stood beside Noah, her notebook pressed against her chest. Claire signaled that she could come down if she wished. Lucy shook her head. She did not need to stand before cameras or accuse anyone. She simply opened the notebook to the drawing she had made 8 months earlier and held it against the glass. 3 broken arcs. 1 red line. The safe her father had told Claire to protect. Mason looked up and gave her a small nod. Lucy's shoulders lowered as she breathed out. Mara returned to the email. "The chain is complete. Mr. Reed's shipping receipt matches the attachment reference. The garage invoice confirms the number and format of the printed pages. Daniel Hart's recording identifies an outside mechanic named Reed. The original metadata names Mason Reed. Mr. Vale's message orders the contributor field removed. His workstation overrode it, and the independent test confirms that the correction in Mr. Reed's documented development sequence resolves the defect Hartwell placed into service." Adrian looked toward the reporters, then toward the open bay door. No expression available to him could make the evidence appear smaller. "Claire," he said, his voice dry, "any public conclusion should wait for the board." Claire stepped beneath the Hartwell banner. She did not raise her voice. Effective immediately, Adrian Vale is suspended from all duties and access. Mara, preserve every device and transfer the record to outside counsel, the appropriate safety regulators, and law enforcement for independent review. She turned to the insurer. Begin a voluntary recall of all 186 HCFV vehicles. Provide replacements at company expense, starting with child transportation, medical services, and elder care. Then she faced the employees, mechanics, cameras, and the man Hartwell had spent years refusing to see. She placed the clean R17 beside the stained one and said, "This company did not discover his design. It erased his name from it." The compressor in the rear bay clicked off. Paper stopped moving through the office printer. A phone vibrated once against the workbench and went unanswered. Hank stood with his mouth slightly open. The Hartwell technicians stared at Mason's scarred hands, the same hands they had dismissed as fit only for wrenches. Even Adrian could not speak. The silence did not feel like victory. It felt like the instant after a locked door finally opened and everyone inside realized how long the air had been running out. Mason did not look at the cameras. He turned the list of affected vehicles toward Claire and tapped the first school route with one grease-darkened finger. "Call them before you put my name anywhere." Claire held his gaze, then reached for the phone. The room remained silent. Not because Mason had proven he was the smartest man there, but because after the truth gave him power, his first thought was still for people who had never heard of him. Behind the glass, Noah placed his palm against the window. Mason lifted his own hand in answer. His name had been returned, Adrian's control had broken, and an entire company was waiting to hear what the forgotten mechanic would demand next.